let's jump into it. So the mitzvah of Kesivas Sefer Torah. So we started last week, or we got into it last week, but we'll recap a little bit here. But we started last week with the Sefer Chinuch. So in mitzvah Taf Reish Yud Gimel, right, 613, the last mitzvah in the Torah in Parshas Nitzavim. He says there's a mitzvah lichtov kol echad sefer Torah la'atzmo. Everyone has to write a sefer Torah for himself. Shenitztavinu lihios lekol ish miYisrael sefer Torah. That the commandment is that each person from Yisrael should have a sefer Torah. Im kisu biyado hariza meshubach v'neav mehod. And if you write it yourself, how much better and how much more beloved is it? K'moshe amru zichron livracha. Kisru Klomer Biyado. So real quick, I just want to jump down to the actual pasuk where he's learning this from, because he's only quoting a piece of it. So in Devarim Lamed Aleph, so again, this is Parshas Nitzavim. The pasuk says, V'yata Kisru Lechem es Ashira Hazos. And now, write for yourselves, this is Moshe talking to Bnei Yisrael right before he died. And he says, write down this Shira, V'lamda as Bnei Yisrael, and teach Bnei Yisrael sima b'fihim, place it in their mouths. And Shira is referring to Ha'azinu. That's what all the Meforshim say, because Nitzavim is right before Ha'azinu, which is a Shira. And what this really means is that the Sefer, the Torah itself is what you should write, and it contains the Shira. At least that's the simple, the Pashut understanding of what the pasuk is telling us. And so from this pasuk, we learn out the commandment of writing a Sefer Torah. So just to go back to the Chinuch, and says Ukemoshe Amru Zichron Livracha. The Gemara Menachos says Kisru Kolomar Biyado. Write it, meaning write it with your hand. Ma'alev Akasav Kilu Kilu Mahar Sinai. If you write a Sefer Torah with your hand, it's as if you have received that Sefer Torah right directly from Har Sinai. And if it's impossible for you to write it with your hand, then you can hire somebody who will write it for you. So here he quotes the whole pasuk, or at least most of it. In other words, write the whole Sefer Torah that contains this Shira. So he says Misharshe Mitzvah. He always does this. He always sort of breaks this apart, gives us an introduction, and then gets into what's the root of the mitzvah. He says Lefi sheyedu bivnei adam shehem osim kol divreihem lefi ha'achana hanimtzes lehem v'alkein tzivanu baruch hu liyos lecho echad ve'echad mibnei Yisrael sefer Torah muchan etzlo sheyichol likros bo. So he says that there's an idea. Right, let's look at his words, and then I think we'll take a step back for a moment. But his words say that if you think about anything that people do, there's always a preparatory step in it, and so to hear that you have to have a Sefer Torah that's muchan, that's set aside, that's ready for you to read from it and to learn from it. And this way you don't have to walk down the street to your friend's house or to the shul or the base medrash or wherever else to find that Torah to learn from. Laman yomad liyira es Hashem. This way you'll learn to fear Hashem, meaning that you're learning Torah from it, and you're learning yiras Hashem. And you'll learn, you'll be able to understand the mitzvahs, these precious mitzvahs that we have. They're so much more valuable to us than gold, right? We're commanded to try hard to do this, every one of us, every individual. Now, what happens if you inherit a Sefer Torah from your father? It's still a commandment, he says, because it's good to have more Sefer Torah around. This way you could lend it out to somebody else who can't afford one, who doesn't have access to one. And it's always nice to have a new Sefer to learn from. For every person should have a new one to learn from. Sometimes we don't want to look, to use something that's old. We want to use something new. This is not clearly not a new concept to us, that having new things is a nice thing. Sefer Chinuch is telling us sometimes that even applies to Svarim and other things like that. Okay. Then he says, Vidabini. So remember, the Sefer Chinuch wrote this to his son. He says, Vidabini, you should know, my son. He says, you should know that the ikar, that the mitzvah from the Torah is not just to write a Sefer Torah. Ein safek shegam b'shar sfarim sheniz chabru al perush Torah. There's no doubt that all the other sfarim that have been written since then that are perushim on the Torah, yesh l'chol echad la'asos mehem k'fi hayecholas mina ta'amim shamarnu. You also have to write, or in the case of our days, write, I guess, purchase one for all the same reasons, so that you have them in your house ready to learn. You don't have to go down the street or go borrow one or something like that. And what if your father left you over an entire library of Sfarim? You'd still have to do so, purchase your own, or write your own. He said, this is the way, this is the path for any person who's a Yirei Hashem, that they have set aside. They have bookshelves. They have almost like a little base midrash, right, inside their houses, that they can learn from. And Kavirkas Hashem Asher Nasan Lahem, right, the blessing of Hashem that we have these nice houses, that we have a base midrash inside of our own house. So that's the chinuch, talking about the mitzvah, and it gives us a good overview of what the mitzvah of Kesivas Sefer Torah is. What's interesting is that what he's really sort of going to is that there's really two aspects. In the yeshivish world, they might say it's zwei dinim, right? That we have two aspects of this mitzvah. We have kisvu lachem as ashira azos, but then we have v'lamda as bnei Yisrael sima b'fihem. So it seems like from the chinuch, it's not enough that we simply write a Sefer Torah and have it, but we have to learn from it. Is it enough that you only learn from it and don't write it? The chinuch seems to be saying you really need both. That's what it appears to be. But let's take a look. What I want to do is sort of jump down to the Tur. So the Tur was the son of the Rosh, and he quotes in Hilchos Sefer Torah, Siman Ayin Reish. He quotes. I'm going to jump right in the middle here to where it says, actually it starts here, V'kisvu, or V'kasav, Adoni Avi Harash. He says, my master, my father, the Rosh, said, Shazel lo ne'amar ela. This is talking about the Kesivas Sefer Torah. Again, this is writing a Sefer Torah. He says, Shazel lo ne'amar ela ledoros harishonim. This is really written for the earlier generations. Shahayu kosvim Sefer Torah v'lomdim ba, because they would write a Sefer Torah and then they would learn from it. They would, unroll it and learn from it. Aval ha'idna, but today, shekosvim Sefer Torah manichim also beveisa knesses. Right? Today we have a hachnasa, right? We write a Sefer Torah, we have a hachnasa Sefer Torah, and it goes inside the aron, inside the shul or the beis medrash or the school or whatever it is. Likros bahem barabim, and they're really used for reading, right? For kriyas Torah b'tzibur. That's really what they're used for. So in our times, mitzvahs say al kol Yisrael asher yada masegas lichtov chumshei haTorah u'mishnah gemara perushehem. So he says, really today, the mitzvah is for anybody who can do this, is to write out the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. You should write out the Chumash, the Mishnah, the Gemara, all the Perushim that we have on that. Lagos behem hu vanov, and then you can learn from those. So the Rosh holds that it's today it's more than just writing a Sefer Torah. Mitzvahs Kesivas HaTorah he kedei lomod ba dichsev, and he says that it's not just to write it. He says kedei lomod ba, in order to learn from it. Dichsev v'lamda as bnei Yisrael sima b'fiyim. Right, this is the pasuk that we quoted earlier. that it's all about studying Torah. V'yayidei Gemara perusha yada perusha mitzvahs vadinim al buriam. And by learning the Gemara, the Perushim, all this is how we learn what the dinim are, right? What the mitzvahs are, the dinim are, the halachos are. So we have clarity on what we have to do. And therefore, this is why we have to write all these other svarim in our day and age. Back in the days, the Rosh, anyway. V'gam shelo lemochram, and this was another halacha that was mentioned, is you can't sell them. The only two reasons, and we'll see this we might see this in the poskim, is that the only two reasons you can really sell a Sefer Torah, or in the case of the Rosh, the Svarim, is if you're going to use the proceeds to learn Torah or to marry off a daughter. There has to be for a big mitzvah like that. That's the only reason you could sell these things. So that's the Rosh, who's now sort of expanding this mitzvah to other Sfarim as well.
Couldn't you also sell and use the proceeds to get a better, higher quality Torah?
That's a good question. He doesn't say that, and what we saw from the Chinuch was that having multiple Sefer Torah was a good thing, and it sounds like, at least from the Chinuch's point of view, it would enable you, having a new Sefer Torah would enable you to then lend out another Sefer Torah. So it doesn't seem so. I don't know, but obviously these kinds of questions where it becomes more practical, you have to ask a Rav, but at least in the general, it doesn't seem like that would be an adequate reason.
What about selling a Sefer Torah for prayers for shul?
To sell it to the shul.
Well, that's, I think, a common practice, that somebody buys a Sefer Torah and donates to the shul. So the one who buys it for himself to study and then donates it to the shul. That's how it works. Right,
and that's really what the Rosh was saying as well, is that today we don't really buy a Sefer Torah to learn out of it. We really buy it and we donate it to the shul, and it belongs to the shul, right? So that does seem to be the practice that even, the Rosh was probably close to it. Maybe not 1,000 years ago, but close to it. So this has certainly been the practice for centuries now, is that you're right. That's become our practice. But what I want to do is, and we're going to continue this, so this is the Beis Yosef. We're going to come back to this in a moment. So this is the Beis Yosef on the tour. That's his, so the Shulchan Aruch was written by Rav Yosef Karo, who's also known as the Beis Yosef. So he had a Perush on the tour, and then he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. So we're going to come back to this piece by him. But on the Shulchan Aruch, there is a Sifsei Chaim, the Shach, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, who quotes a drisha. It's a Prisha and the drisha was one commentary on the tour. This is a little confusing. Unfortunately, at least within Sefaria, I didn't have access to the Prisha and the Drisha, but they are quoted by the Shach on Shulchan Aruch. So we're going to use the Shach to look at a Perush of the Rosh, really try to understand this Rosh a little bit better. Then we're going to go back to the Beis Yosef, because we're going to see that the Beis Yosef and the Prisha are arguing over understanding what is the Rosh really telling us. And then we're going to jump to Reb Moshe to try and get a little bit more clarity on that, and that's where we'll finish. So hopefully we'll be able to get through a lot of this. I think we can. Okay. So the Shach quotes, he says, Kesivas Prisha, near Dehaki Ka'amar HaRosh. So the Prisha says, I think this is what the Rosh is trying to say. Mitzva says, say, Ne'emar Davka Be'elu, V'lo B'Sefer Torah, V'lo B'Sefer Torah. So the Drisha says, I think the Rosh is really trying to tell us that the Iker mitzvahs aseh, the real, the mitzvah today for us is to buy, or write, right? Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Gemara, Mishnah, Perusheim. That's the Iker, not the Sefer Torah. V'lo b'Sefer Torah. The Davka, just get rid of that. Okay. He says, the Davka b'Yemehem Shahayu Lomdim Torah, because going back to the original generations, they would learn the Torah Shabbat Peh Shalom Min Aksav, right? So in those days, they were learning Torah Shabbat Peh Bal Peh. So, ki'im al peh. Hayut tzrichim lumon mesefer Torah hametuyegas kehilchasa muduyegas bechaseros v'yaseros upiske hatamim v'chulei. So the Drisha says something very interesting. He says that in the earlier generations, they would take out a Sefer Torah and they would learn from the Sefer Torah because they knew Torah Shabbal Peh orally. That's how they learned it. It was never written down in their generations. So they would actually take out an unrolled Sefer Torah and they would learn from the crowns. They would learn from, in the Sefer Torah, you have a Kri and a Ksiv, right? The Torah, there are certain words that are written out one way, but we pronounce them differently. So there's always a limud from there. There's what they call mali and chaser, right? Some words are written with a cholam or with a shuruk written out, versus sometimes it doesn't have that in it. So all of these have different limudim from Torah Shabbal Peh. So they would learn all of that by unrolling the Sefer Torah and actually learning from that. He says, Aval, bismanenu, zeshenase lenu heter liktov sefer svarim dapim kol echa b'fnei atzmo. But he said, in our times, when this is a Gemara, I think a Gemara in Gittin that says that we're allowed to write down the Sefer Torah. That we're allowed to write down Torah Shabbal Peh because we're going to lose it, and we can write it, on pages. We can write it on papers, on pages. Right? They didn't have a printing press in those days, so however that looked in those days, but they're writing it on individual pages or what have you. So, and every person was doing this. In Cain, lama lanu lezalza bekavod sefer Torah bechinam limod besocho shalot tzorich. So it's an interesting point that he makes. Why would we take out a Sefer Torah, unroll it, and learn from it when there's really nothing more that we learn from a Sefer Torah that we can't out of our chumash that we can open up? And he says that that's actually a zilzul for the Sefer Torah. We're meaning that it's it's almost almost like a desecration to take out a holy Sefer Torah just to learn out of it anything that we can't, that we could simply learn out of a chumash as well. And he says because of that, for us, the ikar learning is out of a book. It's not out of a scroll. So he says, okay. And therefore, according to at least the way the Drisha understands the Rush, there is no mitzvah aseh today of writing a Sefer Torah. It's only in writing, or I suppose purchasing, the Sfarim that we purchase and that we learn out of. So, Adkan. So now this is the Shach. The Shach says, I think it's like the Rush. We're going to see the Beis Yosef in just a moment to see what the Beis Yosef says, because he doesn't understand it this the same way. So, and the Bach also understands that really it's the mitzvahs, and we're going to see not everybody agrees with this Drisha and with this Shach, that the Iker is no longer to write a Sefer Torah. So everyone is good, okay, at this point. So we have the Rush and we have the Drisha and the Rush saying, really today, all you do is you go buy Sfarim and you learn from them. That is the mitzvahs aseh. Okay, but let's jump back up to the Beis Yosef. And I think it's also sort of in the middle where he goes into this. So let me just find that. Oh, here we go. Okay. Rush. Yeah. Okay. So this is Ladas Rosh Zal Hilkach. Nira Dafilu Bimei Doros Arishonim Mairi. He's talking about the earlier generations. V'chein Pasaka Mordechai B'nei Ha'ir V'Shem Haraviyah. Sefer the Yachid. Sorry, maybe see here. V'chein Nira maybe Rosh Kasav Pirik. No, it's not. I thought that was it. Sorry. Give me a moment. This is talking about selling the Sefer Torah and that sort of thing. Oh, here we go. Okay. I feel the Sefer Torah Pishim and Sosi Kasu de Liba de Harash Amra. So this is the Rush says the Savar de Haidna in Mitzvah B'Kniyas Sefer Torah. Today, he says the Rush says that today there's no mitzvah in acquiring a Sefer Torah. Aval le'ikar dina deyesh mitzvah b'kniyas Sefer Torah afilu yachid aser ein devarim halalu nirali mitam she'echtov besamuch delfi da'ati haidna nami. Says, in my opinion, even today, nami ika mitzvah b'ksiva Sefer Torah gam l'das Rush, and he says even the Rush would agree that even today there's still a mitzvah of Kesivas Sefer Torah, writing a Sefer Torah. So Hilkach near dafilu b'mei doros harishonim ma'iri v'chein pasuk of Mordechai. Okay, so we'll pause here because this is just a part of a longer piece. So what we want to try to understand is what's this machlokas between the Beis Yosef, who feels like even the Rush would agree that today you still have to write a Sefer Torah, the Shach and the Drisha is saying you don't. So what's going on there? So I want to go to Reb Moshe in a. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Hopefully, okay. You guys can see that okay? Okay, awesome. So this was a tshuva that he wrote, quite a while ago, Tafshin Tes Zayin. So about 60 years ago or so. So this is Be'etzim Mitzvahs Ksiva Sefer Torah Ha'idna U'Ba'im Yotzim B'Shal Shutfus. So this is a very long piece. We're not going to get through all of it, certainly not. But he talks about the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, and also, today, usually when there's a writing of a Sefer Torah, or at least a lot of times, sometimes you have one person who donates a Sefer Torah, but many times they build it into this thing where everybody can purchase a letter, a pasuk, a letter, a word, a pasuk, a parsha, right? They try to make it into almost like a partnership, like a shutfus, which is what he's saying. So I think he gets into that as well. We won't touch that, at least not today. But what we do want to understand is like what is really going on in this machlokas between the Beis Yosef and the Shach and the Drisha. So he says, Hinei, B'davar she'elaso b'mitzvah Sefer Torah lahachriya bein Rabosenu harishonim v'achronim hiksha yedidi lisho bi bizmanenu sheyachol lahachriya divrei harishonim shehem kamalachim anachnu aflo kechamorim. He says very nice language about this question that comes in and what's the difference between the earlier generations, the later generations. Okay, so what do we do? Right? Somebody actually asked this question to Reb Moshe, like, what do we do? What is the mitzvah? If I want to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah today, what does that look like? So he says, his name, the Machlokas Beis Yosef Hadrisha, Kedas Harash, B'Yerodea Simen Ein Reish, Im Modeh Yesh Chiyuv Lichtov Sefer Torah Rak Shemosif She'ata Sheitiru Lichtov Torah B'Shabbat B'Chuyavim Gam Lichtov Mishnah Gemar Pe'Shem O Shemitzvah Davka Be'elu V'Lo B'Sefer Torah Nechsi Anan. So he says, what exactly did the Rush hold? Did the Rush really hold that today you only have to write the later, write a Chumash, Mishnah Gemara Pe'Shem, or did he also include Sefer Torah on top of that, as the Beis Yosef said? So let's try to understand this. Okay. So he says, Dihine Lashon Rush Vade Meduyak Kadrisha. So he says when you just read the Rush inside the Torah, it certainly reads like the Drisha, like the Shach who quotes the Drisha. De'im ke habeis Yosef, ma shayach lomar dezehu rak bedoros harishon shahayu kosim sefer Torah v'lomdim bo. If it's really like the Beis Yosef that we really do have a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah, why is the Rush talking about the earlier generations that they would write a Sefer Torah, but then they would also learn from it? And today we write Sefer Torah, we put them in the base, in the shul. Why even include that if you still have the same mitzvah? Shaladina hausafa lichtov gam heim ein shayach chiluk masha az lamdu b'Sefer Torah ve'ata in lumdim ba af im gamata yilmedu me'Sefer Torah ein shayach lepotra miksivas Mishnah Gemara. Dan halo yedainan Torah Shabbat shehem perushi hadinim v'mikros lumdino me'Sefer Torah. V'lo dami ledoros rishon sheyatzu hamitzvos b'Sefer Torah levad mishum shelamdu Torah Shabbat ba'al peh. So he says, like, for us, it's a very different story. We have to open up all these different Sfarim in order to really learn and understand the Dinim. Earlier generations, they didn't. They could learn only out of a Sefer Torah scroll because Torah Sheba'al Peh was oral for them, was known orally to them. V'yadarabba, haya asur lehem lichtov Torah Sheba'al Peh. For them, they couldn't write Torah Sheba'al Peh down. They couldn't write the Mishnah, the Gemara down. It was asur to do so in those days. V'tamua al haresha shadaik arak midastam devarav lefi habeis Yosef haya lefarish bedoros harishonim lo haya mechuyavim lichtov ela Sefer Torah. And he says, if you want to try and understand the Beis Yosef, it really should have said that the Rush should have really said that in the earlier generations they were not obligated to write a Sefer. They were only obligated to write a Sefer Torah. But today, so those generations only to write a Sefer Torah. In these generations, they should also write, in addition to the Sefer Torah, the other Sfarim. That's how it should have read according to the Beis Yosef. So it's very difficult in the language to understand the Beis Yosef. He says, the Yosef is lahakshos the sofa ein chiluk halimud ba minyan klal. And the way that we learn really has nothing to do with the Beis Yosef, because the Beis Yosef is going to say you still have to write a Sefer Torah anyway. So it doesn't matter how we learn according to the Beis Yosef. Kusha gedola al perush Beis Yosef. So this is a very strong kasha on the Beis Yosef. Okay. Aval hanachod afianias daiti beshitas harash mepashtus lashona v'ulai zehu gam kavanas habeis Yosef. But he says, he says, in my opinion, in Rav Moshe's opinion, he says that we can still understand the pashtus of what the mitzvah should be, and this might be also what the Beis Yosef is going after. Dim haya kosev sefer Torah v'lomid b'haya yotzi yedei ha-mitzvah af below Kesivas Mishnah v'Gemara u'peisheim. He says, if you were today, if you were to write a sefer Torah and learn out of it, right, then you would have fulfilled your obligation of writing a sefer Torah. Even if you don't write down the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Perushim, all the other Sfarim, if you just learn out of a Sefer Torah, you have done a mitzvah. You've fulfilled a mitzvah, Kesivas Sefer Torah. You've written it and you've learned out of it. But if you don't learn out of it and you only place it in the Beis Knesses, even though we learn it or we read out of it, but Tzibor, Ki mitzvah Kesivas Torah he lilmod ba'ukriya da'alma shot tzibor sover she'ein ze halimud de'achiyuv haksiva mishum shneimar sima b'fiyam shelo sagi lazeh shemiyah shel hakriya levad. So he says that this is I think a really interesting point that Rav Moshe makes, is that the point that the Rush makes, that we write a Sefer Torah and we put it in shul and all we do is read out of it Monday, Thursday, Shabbos, Yantif, right, Rosh Chodesh, but that's not the learning out of it that the pasuk requires, right? The pasuk says Sima befihem, place those words of Torah in their mouths, which means that they have to understand it. They have to understand what the mitzvahs are, what we're supposed to be doing. That requires much more than just reading the Sefer, reading Torah b'tzibor, reading a few aliyahs out of the Sefer Torah. That's not the same thing as really learning out of it. So if all you do is write a Sefer Torah and donate it to the shul, you really haven't fulfilled the obligation of Kesivas Sefer Torah. However, what the Beis Yosef seems to be saying is that if I today bought a Sefer Torah, wrote a Sefer Torah, and learned out of it, then that's absolutely Kesivas Sefer Torah, and I've fulfilled my obligation. But if you don't do that, the other way to do it, according to the Rosh, would be to, and I know we're just about out of time, but the other way to do it would be to buy all the other Sfarim, a Chumash, a Mishnah, a Gemara, other, all the other explanations that go along with it, and learn out of those as well. So I think we'll have to stop here, but you can see where Reb Moshe is going to understand the Beis Yosef, is to say the Beis Yosef could still be read inside the Rush. The Rush might even agree that if you did all those things today and just wrote a Sefer Torah and learned out of it, that would be fine. But the problem is, if all you're doing is writing a Sefer Torah and donating it and never using it to learn out of, that could be the problem. And then you have to do something else, like buy Sfarim and learn out of those.